Meow! Hupple's cat, the armchair prepper. So stay tuned, and we're going to look at the highlights and lowlights of this book. Selco's been known for a while online in prepper areas. He did a year in, I believe, Sarajevo in the 1990s during the Yugoslavian Civil War. It was kind of a religious war, and he suffered being besieged in a city without much external supply for a year. Now, that being said, that's not actually true. People were able to get out of the city, though it wasn't easy, and food was dropped by the United Nations intermittently about every couple of days. So it wasn't a total siege. A total siege would have probably seen most of them die. A lot of them did die. And if I get around to it, I'm going to do a background on Sarajevo and the Yugoslavian Civil War. I think it's kind of an interesting one. But however, he's had blog posts and his own website and stuff like that. So finally, somebody decided to try to monetize him. And what they've done is they produced this book. Now, it looks a fairly hefty book. It's kind of interesting. The Dark Secrets of SHTF Survival. There's very few dark secrets in here. There's very few specifics on how to survive in here. And it does warn of graphic content. Well, I didn't find it that graphic, but I guess some people might. It promises to give the brutal truth about violence, death and mayhem that you must know to survive. And it doesn't. But it does. So stay tuned. First off, the book itself. It's fairly pricey, but not outrageously pricey for a small volume. It is fairly big, and Selco knows his prepping audience. He uses very, very big type font for those people that can't read, and it uses very, very basic English. However, probably won't be able to see this too well, but what did I find of interest in here as I was browsing it? I marked in a purple highlighter. Pretty much every page. So I'm not going to go through every page because I think it's kind of pointless. What he basically says is that people have two reactions to a sudden SHTF. They become angels and die, or they become animals and die. What a prepper would do is be an animal when they need to be, but be an angel when they should be. So in other words, walking a thin line. His other messages from the book is that lone wolf is not a great idea, that you do need a small compact group, that SHTFs do take people by surprise, and reaction to it is important, and that most modern preppers, specifically in North America, actually aren't reacting to SHTF in anything other than Hollywood fantasy mode. And having lived through a severe SHTF, knowing the rest of the world was just fine, and I think that's a critical part not mentioned in the book, is the fact that if SHTF is global, if what he's going through here is global, there's no MREs being dropped, right? There's no evacuations early on for people who are ill, and you know the rest of the world is in the same mess you're in. I think that would fundamentally change response and what's going on. He opens by talking a lot about media, and very much the Yugoslavian Civil War was a media-driven event. When Tito died, the communist dictator of Yugoslavia and war hero, his loss was enabling various parts of Yugoslavia to actually split off from each other, and to split off from each other politically. The politicians decided to hate other regional ethnicities in Yugoslavia and use the media for that. So I think this is kind of an important piece. Just before S hit the fan, the buildup of hate was so dense that you could feel it in the air. After that, we were fed through the media that there were great differences between us, and the differences were actually so big they might be a problem for our future life in the region. In reality, you can point out huge differences between any group of people or political opinions anywhere in the world. And still, that does not mean it needs to end up in blood. But we were led to believe that blood was the only option for solving our problems. Now, that might sound familiar to people who live in the United Kingdom, who live in France, who live in Canada to some degree, and who live in America. Media feeds violence, it feeds otherness, it feeds the fact that if you are a black man in Canada, you are being perceived differently from a white man in Canada, and if you're First Nations in Canada, you currently have been experiencing genocide for the last 300 years and nobody's doing anything about it. We can hate easily as human beings if we feel threatened. So the media makes us fear, makes us feel threatened, and then says, hey, look at them over there. It's all their fault. All we have to do is get rid of them, drive them out, right? And then driving out becomes killing them all. Now most of my subs, most of you, are sane. Some people aren't sane. A lot of people on a lot of prepper sites are insane. And they need to hear this, but they won't be able to. Whenever you find yourself in a situation when you feel that you generally hate groups of people, options or states, stop for a moment and go through serious mental check. Are you being manipulated by someone, and what are the reasons for it? I witnessed many times innocent people being killed because it was a public opinion was formed that it's okay, and it was scary how fast that opinion was formed. Yeah. Do you dislike transgender people? Do you like doctors and nurses who give vaccines, or do you hate them? Like, what's going on? What are your sources of information? And we talked about echo chambers before, and echo chambers are dangerous for that specific reason. It cuts you off from sources of interest and information that could potentially help you. For example, as a social democrat, liberal, vegan, climate change prepper, a lot of people automatically do not watch me. As a prepper that states that guns are a tool and they have no place on my channel, because if you can't figure out how to use a tool that's as simple to use as a gun, when and where and how, you're an idiot. And if you need to watch a video on it, you're a really big idiot. And if you want to watch people shoot guns online, why would you watch a gun video, people shooting guns at targets for 5-10 minutes, when you wouldn't watch somebody gardening for 10 minutes and actually telling you how to grow food in SHTF? His language is fairly colourful, and I love this one. He talks about an old Yugoslavian freedom fighter who was actually interviewed by a parade for him and all the rest of it from the local dignitaries of his area, and they all said, now we're going to have a few words from the hero. Useless Yugoslavian accent there. And the old hero said, well son, it was a complete and utter shitstorm. And then they bustled him off stage. All war is a complete and utter shitstorm. I mean, you can say what you like about Selco. He spent a long time waiting to try and cash in on his advice, and I'm glad he has finally. He has experienced killing people and people trying to kill him in a SHTF situation. I can tell you that for definite, having read this book. Now, he does repeat the same message over and over, which is that if you decide you are definitely going to bug out, you're probably going to die. If you decide to definitely stay in place, you're definitely going to die. If you decide to defend your home and defend your family and defend your pantry, you're definitely going to die. He also points out later on in the book that when you use human shields, which was common to approach buildings they wanted to attack, that by not shooting the hostages to kill the attackers, you're going to die. The decisions have to be made, and a lot of them are horrific. But you can't do anything other than protect your own life and your families. Now, this also means you may have to run away with just the clothes you're wearing. So if you try and have lots of prepper stocks and stuff like that, it's a great idea. But as soon as anybody knows about it or even suspects it or starts to go home to home, your mythology of you and your gun and your couple of fat buddies defending that homestead is utter garbage. 50 to 200 to 300 people would coalesce in gangs in Sarajevo and act as enforcers. They would take what they wanted. And you have two choices. You avoid them, or you give them what you want. It's that simple. There ain't no fighting a superior force. When I read the words, I'll do that, when SHTF, I feel bad. Because in essence, you do not know what you'll be forced to do. But you will have to do it when the day comes, because on that day, you adapt and overcome. Not by sticking hard to your imagined, I'll only do that. Now, I still think scenarios are good. One like Corsair Training has his EMP, what you do in the beginning of an EMP and going through the EMP scenario. They're a good idea to put yourself in that mindset, and this book puts you in the mindset of somebody unprepared in Sarajevo. The section on surprises didn't surprise me, but I got some background in this. So the surprises for him were how close the fighting will be. So he shows this picture and he says that literally each house facing each other would have enemies in it fighting, and oftentimes the actual battle in that city was closer than that. You'll simply never be sure how safe and secure are your surroundings. 24/7, 7 days a week, 365, the risk of sudden death is there all the time. That will affect everything. The enemy will look, sound and speak like you. Red Dawn is utter garbage. Nobody's going to invade America because, simply put, you have nuclear weapons and you'll use them, even if it destroys everybody. But in a course of civil disturbance or non-civil disturbance, in a total system collapse, your good friend, your good neighbour might well become an animal and kill you and rape your wife and rape your children, male and female, just because they can get away with it because they have the power to do so. You cannot prejudge how people will react in SHTF, and some people will be utterly horrific. So a lot of preppers online talk about how to keep their kids entertained in SHTF because they might get bored, right? And as soon as people start talking like that, I go, oh no, this is not an ice storm. If you're prepping for the end of collapse of society, he says the surprise for him was how busy every average day was. Collecting water, wood, trying to get food, scavenging, like all the time. Because you can't just not do that. You can't just say, well, you know what, I'm tired today, I'm having a break. Even if you've broken your leg, even if you've got dysentery, you have to try and get some food. In SHTF, you are the first unit, rear and backup. If you fuck up and break your leg, there is no medical evacuation. If you did not find food or any other resources, there is no service that will do that for you. It's a hard time that is full of acquiring things and finishing jobs. You are everything when SHTF because the system is gone. Now, I do think a lot of people don't grasp that concept. I think intellectually they might be getting close to it, but I don't think they grasp it. Number 4. The level of the threat. In SHTF, almost everything is a threat to you. Snipers, angry neighbours, mortar shells, gangs, gangs of liberals, all of that sort of stuff. Women, some people are frightened of women. Well, what really is the threat is the lack of food, complete lack of hygiene, level of contamination, risk of illness and injury, being found, being informed on, being tricked, getting captured, and many, many more make up a large amount of threats that most never think about. So he says, imagine every supply that you use is gone and isn't coming back. That's the world of SHTF with societal collapse. Now he says with good preparation and good correct mentality, you can minimise the shock and make the transition shorter. So the reality of defending your assets. This is an asset, right? So you have your prepped home, it's concrete, you have your fire stuff, you're all ready to rock and roll, and a couple of mortar shells or a rocket propelled grenade goes into your house. There you go, preps are gone. So this is one of the reasons I preach caching a lot. I do think if you have certain supplies you need to cache them, and I do think that's really, really important because you cannot guarantee any position, any fixed position as safe. And he mentions that quite a bit. He says that you have to be able to move. You have to be able to move immediately without trying to stay to where you're normalised, where you've got your gear, where your family is, where your ill brother is. You may just have to get up and go. If you don't get up and go, you'll die as well. Now, anybody that follows my channel will not be surprised that I completely agree with what he's about to say. In the end, it all comes to the matter of power and possession. You are just a small piece of everything. You're only a small part of the tool, and I fully agree with that. Network, have a local community, have it functional, prep for it. Prep for your community, prep for the people in your community you like. Make sure that you have a group. Make sure the group is functional. Don't be loyal to the group. If the group's about to be wiped out, run. Okay? This Alamo stuff, fighting the homestead, common in prep fiction. In reality, you all die. 1 second after, which I'm going to take to pieces at some point, is classic for that. You have a well-organized, well-trained, motorized cannibal, which is ludicrous, army attacking an untrained small town, and they stand and fight and win. No, they'd stand and fight and die. His main lesson, other than being adaptation, is what over the years I've learned that it is more important to have 1 more month of food stored or 1 more skill learned than to waste time on worrying who is going to be elected. Politics has no place in prepping. Politics has no place in SHTF. It's you and me trying to live, trying to survive. Nobody gives a damn who the president was if society's fallen. And if you do care about that, and you spend most of your online time thinking about why President Trump has been treated badly or why President Trump exists, either or, you're kind of wasting your prepping time. What you should be doing is figuring out how you are going to filter water that has feces in it, dead human beings in it, whilst under sniper fire in your small town if you can't get out. So Selco's been running some courses for a few years, and if you've got the money and interest, I would probably do one. I've been through most of what he's talking about in my life anyway, so I don't really need to suffer to figure out that it's going to be horrible. I cannot get rid of the feeling that a majority of people see SHTF as big fun, shooting while drinking beer, with additional testing of all their cool gear. I see that in blogs, comments, forums, documentaries, movies. Harsh words from Selco. He's absolutely right. A lot of people are deluded out there. I had more than one participant of my course who told me, "This is not fun. It's hard and it's not pleasant." Indeed. It is not a camping trip. It is not a cross-country drive with the kids and the dog. A lot of people are still clinging to that online. A lot of huge preppers are telling you if only you buy X or Y, you have the advantage and you will live and you will be fine. No, you won't. Like me, he thinks precious metals have a minor place. He also says to be very careful. What he recommends is hoarding old gold wedding rings and jewellery and stuff like that. So when you need to bribe somebody with gold or silver, you reluctantly pull it off your hand or take it off your wife's hand and hand it over. If you pull out a shiny new gold coin at a checkpoint, they're going to think, "Ooh, I wonder if you have any more of them." And the 6 armed guys who've got the drop on you at the checkpoint are going to search you and take them. People don't understand the reality of gang warfare and societal fall. The survival movement is big business, and it has become more, much more, about selling items to make you believe that you are prepared than about learning and gaining knowledge. I think we all agree with that, and I think we all know that. But I'd ask you today, why you still subscribe to big channels that are nothing more than fantasy mixed with selling you crappy junk? Do you need to buy a $400 gas can? Working with other folks, you need to work with other folks. To have friends, group, connections before SHTF. Survival alone is a real tough mother. When SHTF, you will have yourself and people who want to harm you. That is it. So he's talking urban, he's talking siege, he's talking that, right? You cannot collect rainwater for weeks because there's been no rain. You cannot hang tarps inside of old buildings because there's enemies all around looking for signs of life to kill you. Bartering, it will be done, and you have to be careful, and there's rumours of it, and it's essential in a siege mentality. But you get played by people who sell you cigarettes, but the cartons are mostly empty, or filled with something else, or just the ends of cigarettes with foam in them. I would do that in a trade situation. I thought I could get away with it. Or even worse, the guy you're trading with shoots you in the back. People are the biggest threat. Message from Selco's book is you will not know in SHTF who is a threat and who is an enemy, and who is a helper and who is a friend. And day by day, minute by minute, the enemies become friends and friends become enemies, and vice versa. It's going to be extremely fluid. You've got to be very, very careful all the time, and you've got to be really in tune with your environment all the time. I like what he has to say about skills. He says you really need as many skills as you can get. And he actually is a nurse, which kind of amused me because I'm a nurse as well. But he uses nursing skills to actually trade nursing skills for food and ammo and water early on and during the entire SHTF, because it was a skill that was in demand. But one of the things he says is, whatever your skill base is, do remember in SHTF you'll have to shorten your practices. You'll have to shorten those skills. You'll be under stress, things will be missing, you need to be able to adapt. So that's one of the things I've often talked about. You know, do you want a veterinary surgeon in your bug out group or a brain surgeon? Unless that brain surgeon is an avid outdoors person, I would go with vet. All-round skills are going to way better for you than somebody who's very focused. For example, I've got a nurse in my group, that's great. Well, in my group, I've got me, I had like 25 years of trauma ICU background and some military stuff, and Kitty has got 30 years of trauma ICU, very adaptable, used to high-end stuff, no problems at all. But if your nurse works in long-term care, or if your nurse works on a medical floor, yeah, they can check your blood sugar, and for that reason alone this book is worth getting. It is a blast of reality. Like I keep saying, fire arson is going to be a major issue. I have seen people burning other people's houses, sometimes with people inside, just because they like that. They had an expression of joy and happiness on their faces. They did that and similar things when they realised that SHTF, and there is nobody to punish them. They enjoyed it. This will be a minority, but it will be an active and aggressive minority. As I've said before, if you have a good social network and you're not in the middle of a big city, one of the things you need to do quite early on in SHTF, with a fall of society, is to identify the people that are going to rape, torture, burn and kill for giggles and take them out. However you wish to take them out. Again, remember, he was under siege in a city. One of the things that he noticed very early on was stench of garbage everywhere. Later on, there was the stench of burned bodies everywhere, and it was a horrible smell that is with him more than 20 years later. If you've ever smelt rotting bodies, you'll know what he's on about. And a lot of dead bodies in one place, without much hygiene, without much water, without animals eating them very much, trapped under blown up buildings, that stench is going to be pretty bad. The stench alone is going to force relocation. Now, what he doesn't mention in this book, and I want to get into Sarajevo in a separate video, is the fact that the people who bugged out rurally were actually easier to be found and gathered up and executed. The ones who really kind of survived from the ethnic groups under attack here mostly ended up in the cities and mostly saved themselves by being under siege in the cities. He points out he had many opportunities to see what was going to happen, and he could have left Yugoslavia. He did not. He did not believe that in the 20th century this would happen in a first world country. Well, it did. One of the things he says but doesn't say is acclimatization. For example, I'm an ICU nurse. I have no problems dealing with people who've got liquid feces all over themselves and dribbling out the bottom of the bed. Not like it. I can deal with it. No big deal. I know ICU nurses that can't deal with sputum, with phlegm. Really can't deal with it. I can't deal with eye injuries. I have a real hard time with eye injuries. What he recommends is you actually get used to the stuff in the now that you will find difficult to deal with in SHTF. And I think that's very true. There's a substantial number of preppers out there that are frightened of needles, they're frightened of blood, various whatever you're frightened of, heights, whatever, loud noises, dark spaces. Do some prep training now where you actually confront some of your fears in the now before you have to deal with them in SHTF. I think that's sound advice. We tend to prep to our strengths. We don't tend to prep to our weaknesses. What's the best gun for SHTF? He tells you. I have the best gun for SHTF because someone put a huge amount of money into marketing it. If most preppers look at their storage, they can find items they know the theory of using but never used it. That's very true. A lot of things are still in packets for me, I know that. The best gun for SHTF is one where you can get ammunition for it. The best gun for SHTF is one that you can go through urban homes with it easily. The best gun in SHTF is the one that you can use right-handed or left-handed, because when you're clearing buildings, and I never see people do this, when you're clearing buildings, as you go through the building, if you can actually move your gun from hand to hand, dominant to non-dominant, and still effectively sweep the room you're going into, you actually avoid, as he says, putting your body out as you're doing the sweep, right? So you want to be that, not this. I think that's an important thing. I really do. He also says a good gun is a gun that you can use without ammunition, as a club and also as a spear to tear people's faces apart just by shoving it as hard as you can into them. He talks a lot about knife fighting in this book, points out to people killing people with a knife is difficult, it's possible, that you have to use an awful lot of force, that just going bang 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 in the stomach's probably not going to kill them, that even if you cut somebody's carotid artery, if they're fairly strong because of the shock and fear thing, they may still grab you by the throat and actually kill you before they actually bleed out. Death is not usually bang bang. One of the guys who told him how to fight with a pistol said to him, have 2 magazines. When they run at you, boom 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 boom, just fire the full mag, reload, and then fire the second mag. Sure, you can kill somebody with 1 or 2 bullets, bang bang, like the police are taught, but in SHTF, where they're coming at you to kill you, kill them. This is why many preppers will die. Regular folks will run. But some preppers take so great a pride in their plan or equipment, they do not make the right decisions when it matters because of their ego. But if I see that my survival is in question, I'm ready to say, F it to everything. Sometimes to survive means not to win, but to give up and wait for the next chance. Do not expect to be a winner all the time. This is also very true. When you get more experience as a survivalist and as a prepper, you may even become arrogant, and you can think you know what to deal with and can stay and wait. I've seen this on prepping forums a ton, and also online a lot. There's a lot of big names out there who are insufferable bores, not that smart, and I can think of numerous ways to take out their location. But they don't, because they have 4 or 5 guys who love them and they have weapons. But if you're living in a chipboard house with no food, except stored food, don't expect to live. He talks about gun confiscation. It's no surprise to me. You guys can buy the book and read it yourself. It's not really a factor that I worry about. What he actually says in the book is a useful thing is to make sure you have unregistered weaponry and unregistered ammunition in place where you have to register the ammo as well. Like, make sure that when they come for your guns, give them up, because the people that are coming for the guns are going to be very, very heavily armed. And if you don't give up the guns, they may just kill you. And it's never, in his opinion, worth dying over a principle. I think that's kind of an important topic. But again, you know what I mean? If you have unregistered weaponry, nobody's going to steal them, and you've still got weaponry. As he says, the good side of coming from a country that has no history of gun rights is that you've always got illegal guns hidden somewhere. You're used to that in your culture. You would no more think of registering a gun because you're not allowed to, but you have guns anyway. And as he says, there is no need to brag about that. Talks about the average day in SHTF, and again, I think a lot of preppers out there, a lot of the big channels as well, they really have never experienced operating in an SHTF environment. And he has, and I have. As I keep telling people, you know, if you're going to bug out, and it's not your house is on fire bug out situation, and you decide to go to your bug out location, you really should be travelling at night. You really should not be travelling through major arteries. You should be cautious what you're doing. He says that for that reason most of the activities they did were at night, but it was dangerous, but they felt safer because of the snipers by operating at night. Now, he had about more than 10 people in his home, and they had a schedule, so somebody was always alert and aware of what was going on 24/7, and that's a critical function as well. So if you are a lone wolf, figure out how you're actually going to stay awake for the rest of your life, because you do need to sleep. You're already going to be hungry, tired and stressed. Without adequate sleep, you're going to make mistakes, and mistakes and grit down will kill you. So like I said, this book's not going to give you how-to whatevers. He does mention food. He talks about pancakes, how they would use towards the end any sort of grass seed ground up to make flour that they had left expand further, and they would make pancakes, which were basically local picked greens. Dandelion leaves is about the extent for most people, and a little bit of flour. So, you know, if you've got some salt, if you've got some spices, if you've got some sugar, and you've got adequate amounts of flour stored by, you're going to be in a much better nutritional position than people who are literally starving. He talks about people eating wormy food with worms on it, and you just don't look at the food and eat it quickly. Yeah, if you can't cook it, then for sure. And if the food's got worms on it but is otherwise only food you've got available, you are going to cook it. Now I always say about botulism, make sure you heat the thing to boiling and keep it there for a minute to 2 minutes, preferably 5 minutes, and stir like crazy, because botulism is a real thing. It never happened to him or his family or anybody in this book, and that would be typical for most tinned food. But once you get beyond the year mark in Grid Down, if you do come across food that's 10 years, 20 years out of date, really consider botulism. It is a definite risk factor, and if you are eating expired MREs, make sure you boil all of the food in the MRE packets, including the jelly, before you wolf it down, because botulism's horrible. So he talks about how in Grid Down, in SHTF, large armed groups could just come up to you and say, you are coming with us, and they would make you work for them for free, and you had no choice other than death. So hiding was the best thing to do. He also talks that a lot of the gangs started their own forms of informal prison. They started prostitution. Prostitution wasn't necessarily the woman's choice. Age didn't really come into it. Anybody over 14 was classified as an adult anyway in Grid Down very early on. And that some of the helpers from the United Nations actually would visit those incarceration units and use the brothels inside them for women. People aren't that nice. He talks about how they tried homeschooling and then they just gave up on that. They didn't have the energy for this stuff. Normality had gone, right? And if you either accepted the new normals and got on with it and lived, or you didn't and you died. One of the things he does, he talks in detail about wood gathering. I've always said people, wood gathering is a everyday activity. So the first problem was we did it in pitch blackness. After that, the next problem was to either carry it in big pieces and be slow and vulnerable, or chop it down into smaller pieces and spend more time in that place, which was also not desirable. Or to leave someone to guard it while others took down bits, or to go all together and risk that someone took the rest before we get back. As a carrying system, people often used homemade carts, very rudimentary setups made from old baby cart or wooden box with wheels from a baby cart or similar. Or simply we would carry it on our back in pieces and chop it up later. It was a heavy job. Finding firewood was a constant job. There were days when we were good. We would have enough food, water and wood. We were good. But usually we were always missing something. Not to downplay the physical threat, but preppers today usually focus only on the physical threat, on fighting, weapons and similar. There is much more to survival. And he gives you a taste of it in this book. I totally recommend this book. I think I have a hard copy or online if it's available. I think it's required reading. It didn't shock me, it didn't surprise me, it didn't upset me, but it did make me realise that SHTF is going to be harder than people think. I haven't experienced a year-long SHTF in a siege situation in an urban environment. I've experienced very similar to what he's talking about in my early teens and before I became a nurse. He's correct. This is a very, very important book. Gear will not help. Supplies will not help. They're very important to have them, but what you need to be able to do is just to say, F it and run when confronted with a superior force. The biggest problem they had was not having enough water for all their needs, so sanitation quickly went down the thing. Toilet paper ran out, so they used clean rags, water and similar. People use the river to clean those. Again, I keep talking about that. Unless you have a spring-fed system, all water has to have human body bits in it and chemicals and probably petrol in it, and will probably have serious amounts of feces in it in Grid Down. So have a solid plan. He talks about how he never really saw proper sanitation filtering devices created for this. They didn't have filters. This is the 1990s. But he never really saw anybody do much other than a few rocks and a bit of grass. So, you know, people say sand and gravel and rocks and blah, blah, blah and do all this. But they kind of forget the point that you have to change them out on a frequent basis. And where are you getting that stuff from? Charcoal is a really useful tool for filtration. But again, in a condition of Grid Down, setting that up, getting the equipment for it, is going to be labour intensive and also put you at risk. Drinking from a puddle in the road with mud in it is something he did on more than one occasion. It was much more important to him to have the water than to avoid the contamination. And he says pretty much everybody was sick a lot of the time with gastric problems. So you need to be able to clean yourself, you need to be able to clean your house, you need to be able to clean the water adequately, and you need to be able to do it safely in appalling conditions and possibly without gear. All of that stuff's technically possible, and it's time to figure out this now. You know, I've got 20,000 gallons, I don't care, somebody shoots a bullet through it, you lose all the water. Or there's a sudden freeze, you weren't expecting because you live in Arizona, but there's been a nuclear war, and your 20,000 gallons ruptures. Next day you go out there, the ice is gone, water's everywhere, you've lost it. Whatever you've gathered, whatever you've saved is important as a prep, but it is to be discarded or can be removed like that. That's the main message from this book, and he's saying adapt to that as fast as you can. Adapt to the uncertainty and the unsafety as fast as you can. So Yugoslavia is like any European country, but they had 10 or more living in each house by the end of this, by the SHTF situation, purely because houses were destroyed, plus people gathered together for safety. And he says, yes, taking more people into the house made more mouths to feed, but it gave them more people to transport water and food and wood and security. And he believes that was better than the problem of having more mouths to feed. Now remember, the European powers and the Western powers were dropping MREs frequently into this city throughout the entire siege. So although food was awfully hard to get and was a problem, they weren't without resupply. Very chaotic resupply, but they did get it. In a global SHTF, nobody will be dropping you MREs. So I just tell you, one task he did every day was called scavenging. Going through rotten, crashed buildings again, try and find anything they could eat, anything they could use. What he really wanted was shoelaces, not plastic shoelaces, but the old cotton ones to use as wicks for lamps. He really liked simple crowbars for actually taking frames off doors so he could actually burn it for wood. Small pot with a lid. Small pot with a lid. Specifically so you could break the bottom of a fuel tank or an oil container of a car and drain off the stuff and then put the lid on it so it doesn't evaporate. So you have a source of gasoline for heating and as a weapon. Now he specifically says a multi-tool like a Gerber or similar would actually have been a very useful thing for him to have in his siege conditions. And that's ding for hopefuls. I'm actually going to get one. I don't have a Leatherman, always consider them rubbishy. I'm not really into doing mechanical stuff, but I think he's right. There's numerous panels that you could remove a lot easier with a multi-tool. If you haven't got a screwdriver available in a grid down situation, it's going to be a lot easier to hold on to a multi-tool than onto a toolkit. So I'm going to take that on board and I'm going to get myself one. So if anybody out there has any recommendations for brands and type, put them in the comments. Much like us, we don't believe our society is going to fall, nor did they. When it fell, most people had 1 or 2 days food in the pantry and that was it. Very quickly people panicked and looted and took everything they could out of the stores. That still left the majority of people with very, very little food. SHTF at the beginning was enormously fast. It was crash, 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 crash. 1 thing, 2 things, 3 things, 5 things going wrong. By the hour, by the day. This wasn't suddenly everything gets turned off. They had electricity on and off. They had water on and off for about a week or so. Then it went away and never came back. Everybody used every available piece of soil for gardening. There wasn't enough, and it was hard to hold on to the produce. They only survived because, like I said, for the MREs, they would have definitely starved to death if it hadn't been for that. The old folks who were around were able to give them knowledge of local foods and what to do to survive because they'd been through World War II, which in Yugoslavia was a horrific experience. And that's another thing. Don't discount older people who've been through the Korean War, who have been through suffering in their past lives. They actually will be able to help you a lot more than the 30-year-old buck who's got his Armalite and his plate shield on and did 1 tour as a truck driver in Afghanistan and thinks he knows everything. You might want to look at the 60, 70, 80-year-old guy and talk to them. They may have more knowledge and valuable skills for you than the 30-year-old guy. Things you need to know about eating in SHTF. Acquiring food in urban settings comes down to the idea of taking food from other people. Either people who are not there anymore, empty houses, or people that are still there through trade or attack. In the end, it comes down to the idea that you need to be prepared very well for SHTF with your stash of food or your small garden, wherever you're going to choose what to have and how to use it in the most efficient way. You should minimize the need to go out and scavenge, at least until you figure out some things. Now, this is familiar to me. I think most active service people have spent 24 hours or even 48 hours suffering what he's talking about here. I've actually spent longer than that in hostile conditions in my teenage years, operating in harsh conditions. So what he says is this: the real problem is actually being forced to operate under the condition of having less food and water than needed and lower quality of it. What that means. It means, for example, you need to combine crawling for 6 or 7 hours across the field because there might be snipers, hiding for a day or two with no food or water in an abandoned house as silently as you can but awake the whole time, and shooting for 2 whole days without any amount of food or water, any amount, because the situation caught you without it. Going into that, you're dehydrated. Going into that, you're malnourished. Going into that, you are tired. Coming out of it, same thing. That's what SHTF is. It's not an operational objective where you go in there and you take out the objective, you get out and you fly back to base. There ain't no green zone. He does apologise for his non-English, and you'll have picked up on that, but I didn't find it an issue whatsoever. But there is actually a typo right there. Blatant typo. Whoever did the editing, bad person, you should have done a better job. Now, if you look online to the bigger prepper sites, you can pretty much tell that there's going to be cannibal gangs running around North America eating everybody. Now, given sufficient time, given sufficient lack of food, possibly. But by that point, you will be a hardened, seasoned SHTF survivor, or you'll be dead. They had cases of cannibalism. No, not as far as he could ever tell. There was no actual cannibalism ever occurred at all. Remember that when people were shot, it was dangerous to approach them, and then they rotted quite quickly. People need to realise that the road to that extreme is very, very long. It is. He did eat spoiled and old food of different kinds, expired food, cans of cookies from military storages that had been expired for decades, food with worms cooked together in those expired cans, grass that was boiled in water, leaves from trees. We ate different kind of meat, pigeon for sure, and I am quite positive cat meat once and rat meat once probably. Again, they were getting MRE drops. You spend a year in grid down and you're going to eat everything you can find. So that means that there'll be very little food, if any food, available in an urban environment very quickly as after HTF, and in a rural environment, I think the same thing. So what was violence like? Violence was shocking, that's what he says. I can say that at the beginning people acted very brave. Yeah, at the beginning. Later on they realised it was better to live than to be brave. The attacker is running towards the guy behind cover and constantly shooting. You see that all the time on prepper videos, right? The other guy behind cover just leans forward for a second, gets the timing right, and kills the foolish attacker. Don't attack front on, don't attack without barriers there. Really consider a back attack. There's no honour here. The objective is to kill without being shot at. The usual way to get inside somebody's house was to use hand grenades or a rocket prepared gun, a rocket prepared grenade. So they would use, like I said before, they would use human shields, they would use psychology, they would use megaphones, and he says that that's really devastating. They describe hour after hour after hour this gang that doesn't take prisoners saying, we're going to look after you, just give up. And people would give up and then go out there and be killed by these gangs. Or they would say, look what we're going to do this to your wife, we're going to do this to your daughter, and talk about that. And he says, you listen to that hour after hour, and you don't be affected by it. He goes, we'll all be affected by that. You know, if you've got 150, 200 people going through the streets, searching every house, looking for anything they can get for themselves, and killing anybody that stands in their way, you may have to spend 48 hours hiding in rubble, but staying awake the whole time in case they come into that area. That's a huge psychological, physical strain. No water, no food, no light, nothing. Silence, silence. Have you got the mental strength to be that isolated in that much danger? A lot of people don't. One of the things I've always thought about with stoves is ease of use, right? And You'll have noticed when I talk about my BioLite stove, I talk about it will boil water in 5 to 10 minutes. I was kind of chuffed to bits to see that in Sarajevo very soon a stove's reliability was rated in times of time to take to boil water, because that meant less fuel. So the faster it would boil, less fuel. That was a critical thing about the stoves. So whether you want to talk about the Angry Prepper grill, or you want to talk about a propane stove, or you want to talk about the latest wood stove that costs $185 American because it's made out of titanium, so it's fractionally lighter than the stainless steel thing. Whatever stove you use, make sure the fuel supply is going to be easy to get if you're being sniped at, and is also going to last a long time. So again, I do recommend BioLite. No paid promotion, I do recommend it. Very, 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 very good piece of kit for boiling water using very, very little wood. Now, there ain't no waste in the wasteland. The city was stuffed full of garbage rotting. It was horrific. He does mention very briefly, and I would like more on this, that the garbage all got reused. It was all reused, everything. Rotten, stinking, rotten garbage lying there in the sun, baking for months. During the full year of the siege, every single piece of garbage got repurposed and reused. There is no waste in the wasteland. There is no disposable. We live in a culture that's disposable and single use. I see single use all the time in prepping supplies. I'm guilty of it myself, I guess, with Bics. But single use is a dangerous philosophy if you are trapped, and it goes on for a year or more. So this guy's a nurse, right? So people would be sick all the time, they would try whatever medicines they could get, and then they would try whatever natural remedies people suggested, whether it helped or not, who knows. Basically what they would do is they would use quarantine. They would separate them from other people as far as they could. One method, and pretty stupid in that time because of other bad factors, was just to leave a sick man to clean on itself without food or anything, just a small amount of water. What else are you going to do? There ain't no hospitals. You can't look after your wife or your child in bed 24/7 if they're that sick, because you have to get out, get water, get wood, try and find some food. It's going to be brutal. You have to make brutal decisions, horrific decisions about people you love dearly. Maybe you love more than your own self, but if you die, they die. It's going to be tough. Ways people ended up dead. An example would be that when SHTF, you are desperately trying to have and use power generator, and like all the rooms in your houses, just because it means a normal life for you. That normal life is gone. And trying to bring it back in that situation usually means more troubles. Holding on to all comforts and behaviour you are used to can be dangerous. And yet, you see these big name preppers all the time talk about maintaining normalcy for their families and their kids. You can, and you should, have as many hand sanitizers, soap, disposable face masks, etc. as possible. But still end up dead if you're not ready to accept the fact that one day you might have to eat roasted rat or pigeon. Pigeon's actually a delicacy in France, isn't it? Well, it is in Quebec. Mind you, they're French. To not starve. You might be forced to hug a dead guy in order to survive. Now, he did talk about that in the book. Now, I would go further than that. If you are in a situation where there are dead people around you and people are coming to get to you, wherever possible, actually put yourself underneath rotting corpses. The more rotting, the better. People really don't want to touch corpses. They might hit it with a gun butt, but again, if they shoot or hit you with a gun butt or stick a knife in your leg, you'll have to be silent and not react, or they'll find you and kill you. Death is better than life, sometimes. But if you really want to live, you better be prepared to really, really suffer silently. Because, to be honest, nobody cares. If you have a bug out group, look at the guy in the bug out group you really, really like, right? Next time you're out there with training or drinking beer and eating pizza, think about the guy you really, really like in your bug out group. Imagine he's been shot 5 or 6 times in his belly, and he's lying in the street, and the snipers are still there, and he's screaming for 24 hours for his mother for help as loudly as he can. That's the kind of situation that will be common in SHTF. Are you psychologically ready for that? I don't think any of us are until you're in that situation. But they're the scenarios we should be thinking about, not some of the weirdo ones like, well, if the lights are off, I'll do this. If the lights are off, I'll do that. Well, what happens if your wife's lying in the street, shot in the belly, dying over 24 hours in agony? and you can't shoot her, I would suggest shooting her, actually, because there's snipers there. Can you cope with that? You might not want to cope with it, but that's the whole point here he's making in this book, is if you're not able to adapt straight away to the fact that society's gone and the criminals are in charge and it's chaos, you're all going to die. So physical prep is very important, and I'm trying to work on mine. It's been 3 years now and I'm just in a ghastly physical state, but I'm going to go for a bike ride with Kitty when she gets back, and I'm going to try the GoPro. Anyway, if you build it too firm, too strong, and then there's SHTF, everything you imagine doesn't fit the given situation or scenario, you are still pursuing and acting in that way, imagine dealing with it, you're going to have serious problems. So scenario building, books, great idea, videos, great idea. Do never be attached to a plan. Have plans, have ideas what you're going to do, be able to switch them off. The situation will not adapt to your mindset. The situation will kill you if you are sticking too firm to your plan when it is not working. You simply have to adapt. It goes for any situation. If your plan and mindset are that you will defend your home until you die, you're probably going to die. Whenever I hear people say, I'll do that when SHTF, or I'll do this when SHTF, I feel sorry for them. With SHTF, you will adapt and change your given plan according to the situation, or you will not survive. Violence is a tool. So that's what he talks about. He talks about law, he talks about what's going on. He talks, people don't pay attention to others now, and those who didn't in SHTF didn't last that long. Groups came together very quickly, and groups came and went. They raped women, they did torture people in odd ways just for giggles. Not a lot of that happened, but enough of that happened. Irrational hate to other groups was there, people burning alive, private prisons, you know, children being killed. People would be forced to have sex with their own children or with their grandmothers just for giggles from some of these people. So basically, you don't want to get caught. You want to hide. You might want to fight, but you might die. But as far as you can, remember, even regular folks can become so cruel so fast. This is no surprise to anybody that's been in combat. Snipers tend not to try and kill. They try to mortally wound their victims, and then they wait and they mortally wound everybody that comes to try and help them. Only once people stop coming to help, then they just finish off the job. So that's something you need to be aware of. There's lots of videos online about how to deal with snipers, but the fact is, if you do have a sniper, there will be one or two people in your compound lying there gut shot or leg shot, screaming in agony, and if you approach them, you're going to be lying down next to them as well. Of course, in the movies you rush under fire, no, mysteriously don't get shot, or you just get grazed, and then you save them and drag them off. Dragging people to help can only be done when there's no fire situation occurring. Talks quite a bit about knife fighting, because a lot of that happened. He said if somebody pulls a knife on you, shoot them if you got a gun. Just kill them. Don't talk, don't negotiate, don't try and run off. They pull a knife, just kill them. He talks about if you are going to get involved in a knife fight, you're going to get cut, you're going to get hurt, and you need to know that going into it, and that's definitely true. And you need to try and minimise where you're being cut so you don't lose the ability to use your hand grip. That's something that's very important. Blocking motions for knives are a great idea, but if you get severed here by a sharp knife, you're going to die. Now, the dude's a nurse. He says, remember, even a small cut in SHTF can kill you. You can get septic shock and die. He doesn't say why. But that's what the problem is. That's why you should have pet antibiotics. You should be able to clean wounds out properly and deeply. You should have sterile dressings available long after there's no packets available in the hospitals, because there's no hospitals and all the packets have been used. This is his advice, and I think it's good advice to actually get ready for SHTF now. Realistic training. Maybe going camping for 10 days using a trash bag, like a tent, with 10 small cans of food and 10 litres of water. And then walking every day during that 10 days for 10 kilometres. But on the 11th day, run a few kilometres and then shoot and see how accurate you are with your body wasting away. And still, the most important thing will be missing from this training. While you're shooting at beer bottles and targets, they're not shooting back at you trying to kill you. They're not shooting from the side, they're not shooting behind you. You're not under fire. Bullets go both ways. I keep telling people that. I've seen it numerous times. If you get involved in a firefight, expect to lose people, expect to get seriously wounded yourself. Try to avoid firefights. Killing people using weaponry, great. Firefights, avoid it. So he says in SHTF most gunfights are just people spraying bullets randomly, and that's absolutely true. He also says that a real gunfight is a dynamic thing. It will have pauses, it will have moments where it picks up again. He says the most important training we can do as preppers is to get used to suffering whilst moving forward to an objective and doing a goal. And I think that's true to a large degree. A lot of people use their ferro rods a lot online, but not many of them use them after coming out of a river that's cold. They don't use them in very windy conditions. So try to test your preps as hard as you can, but testing your preps actually means testing you. So he talks a little bit about grey man without naming grey man. If the level of violence rises around you, you want to still blend in. Do not stick out as weak, but not also stick out as extra tough. Now a lot of people portray that. Don't mess with me, I've got the plates and I got the rest of it. He says that those types of people were actually took out really quickly. What you need to do is look a little bit tougher than average, but not too much. Not worth messing with, but not a major threat. So he talks about how a normal family guy became really psychotic and really violent, was really known as a good killer, strong killer. During a normal trade with a 20-year-old woman, she actually pulled out a knife and killed him. And he feels it was possibly because of his reputation. The other thing is that he says that if you see trouble ahead, cross the street, go back, hide. Don't confront things openly. This goes to the patrolling my border philosophy a lot of prepper groups have. Openly wearing full fake army uniforms, carrying automatic weaponry, having the mics on, patrolling your bug out locations border might be an attractive thing if you can call on air support and reinforcements and be airlifted out to a green zone. In SHTF, what you're doing is you're telling everybody around you, those guys are a threat. And they'll act on it. They'll take you out one by one. Pouncing around, looking like you're a G.I. Joe, is not the way to approach a societal collapse. Not surprisingly, he talks a lot about PTSD, he talks about the effects of the transition back to normalcy once the United Nations enforced the end of the civil war in Yugoslavia. And this is kind of a key thing right towards the end of the book. And I think we should all bear this in mind. I see in many survival forums communities that people talk about freeze-dried blueberry muffins for breakfast. They're big generators on what to do to keep life normal in survival situations. So you can tell the book's a little repetitive, but I didn't find it so, because I agree with it. I think this is just half of prepping. And people miss out on the other half. Get comfortable with change and to live worse. Totally important. Without hope. You keep hope within you that you'll survive and make do and you'll find something good and all the rest of it, because life without hope is hopeless. But false hope, they'll come in and fix this. Somebody will stop them from doing this. That ain't going to work. Now I did as a joke tell people that I was actually going to do a video about me pooping out in the woods. And actually I'm going to. And I think it's a skill that if you has anybody out there not defecated in a woodland scenario where you walk in, there's nothing there. I'm not talking about an outhouse. If you haven't, you need to practice that skill. It's a skill. It's difficult to squat when you're not used to it. It's easy not to clean yourself properly. You have to have good hygiene. You need to be able to bury it properly. You need to take in fact water. Insects will bite you in the summer. So this is what Selco says about that. Get comfortable doing your toilet things out there if you have the chance. And do this responsibly, with digging a hole and covering up. Learn simple things like living like humans had to for many thousands of years. Good advice. So A+, it's not a manual on how to deal with SHTF. It's more about the psychology and the effects of it and how to actually adapt by doing whatever it takes. So I'm going to finish off with this long quote. That does not mean that you do not need to prepare yourself for every possible scenario. It actually means that when S hit the fan, you're not going to be in control of many things. People will die, so you have to be comfortable with this kind of massive change. You can only take care as good as possible about a small circle of problems around you and your family. Everything outside that circle depends on other things, bigger things. But inside that small circle, you need to do everything that you can to be prepared. Also prepare to get hurt, get comfortable with change and experiencing pain. Definite A+, really enjoyed this. Thought it was pretty good. What do you guys think? Are we ready for this in prepping in North America? I think people that have served in or experienced SHTF conditions like he talks about are going to really identify with this book. I know I did. I never really identified with his blog postings that much, but yeah, I like this book. Get it, read it, think about it. If you have a bug out group, buy one copy, send it around. Make people take notes about what they thought the most important thing in the book was, and have a group discussion. This type of scenario building based upon actual lived experience is absolutely critical. Anyway, I guess I'm going to have to put up a parental warning for this one. Anyway, toodles.